welcome to the Building and Growing podcast. We're delighted to have Adam Wilkinson from CBRE with us today. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Yeah, thank you. It's one of the last summer days in London. I think, we both had a lovely walk outside on the way. That's it. It is. But, we're here. We got our waters. We got, the hot lights above us. Thank you for coming by today.
No problem at all. Look forward to it.
Fantastic. Adam, I think it's always best if the guests introduce themselves. So do you want to kick off with an intro to yourself and what you work on?
Yeah, absolutely. So Adam Wilkinson. So I'm currently working as the QHSE director for part of CBRE. So CBRE is the world's biggest real estate firm, massive organisation, does everything you can imagine related to commercial property. I work for a business, Global Workplace Solutions, GWS, which is the FM and projects business. Within that, there's a load of structures, but I'm concerned with the facilities management business in the UK. So that's the part that I work in. We've got a number of businesses within that, and I look after the quality, health, safety and environmental function for that UK business. But it's very complex, lots going on. And
fantastic. Oh, it's a lovely business, though, CBRE, met quite a few stakeholders from there. Everyone's very positive and engaging.
Yeah, it's an awesome place to work. I mean, I'm biased. I've been there 10 years. I started as a QHSE manager, so came in about a decade ago doing that. And, the progression's actually been pretty quick, right? So I'm now looking after the business group of one of the divisions which I started working in. So loads of opportunity, and you find actually that the people that work at CBRE are driven. It's quite a dynamic place, quite an exciting place. It's cool. By the nature of the brands, I mean, we work with just about every organisation. I think the stats were, I lose track, but it was over like 90% of the sort of Fortune 500. CBRE touches them in some capacity, professional capacity.
Wow.
So, from a QHSE perspective, I'm a really nosy person. I like to kind of be curious and see what's going on, and I get to do that across hundreds. I mean, we've got 800 clients in my business bit.
Yeah,
so
fantastic.
You work for one organisation, but the reach of that organisation is just vast. So you get stuck into a whole load of other stuff. It's a really cool place to work.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it sounds like kind of a dream job, because I guess I imagine with those 800 organisations or clients, then there's also kind of, that they would have very diverse business operations too.
Yeah, I mean, look, would I say it's a dream job? To me, it is. I don't think anyone dreams of working in QHSE, right? I've yet to meet a 16-year-old at a careers fair or anything that's sort of avidly dreaming about a career in QHSE, pilots and military and finance and stuff maybe, but I don't know if QHSE's made it to a dream job yet. But for me, genuinely, I love what I do, and I think it's not so much the QHSE aspects of it. And to be fair, when you get to kind of a certain level in any role, it just becomes a leadership role. But you're absolutely right. For me, I enjoy what I do because of that breadth. One day you could be talking to manufacturing, the next day is logistics, the day after is finance, the day after that's pharmaceutical,
Yeah.
So being able to get involved with all that is really interesting, particularly if you've got a short attention span like I have.
Fantastic. And I guess, Adam, how did you get into safety in the first place?
Well, I mean, as I've just said, it wasn't a dream, right? So it wasn't from a young age. I've never known what I wanted to do. I think I've always been quite holistic in sort of the way that I want to run my life, and work is part of that. So when I was I'm fairly academic, so I was always going to go to university. I wanted to go to university. I went to a school where that was the kind of promoted thing. So it was inevitable, I think, that I was going to go, and it was certainly something I wanted to do. But I didn't really have anything in mind that I wanted to do after. I just wanted to go and have that experience. And all of the universities that I looked at, they're all on the south coast. They all had a kind of beachy coastal sort of vibe to them. Nice. So that was what was important to me at the time. And I ended up at the University of Southampton doing oceanography and physical geography.
Wow.
which again, because of my short attention span, suits me because it's multidisciplinary, right? So oceanography, a slightly obscure niche science, but it incorporates physics and biology and geography, and spent a bit of time floating around in the Solent on boats, and it was just fantastic. So did that, came out of uni with a degree, and I sort of went into an environmentally engineering type thing, but wasn't ready really for work, so I left. And I said to my dad at the time, do you know what? I've got this job. It's cool. It's okay, but I'm going to go to Australia for a bit and do a bit of traveling. And he was like, well, there's this thing called the credit crunch, and I don't know if that's the wisest thing because the economy's not looking. I was like, it'll be fine. What's the worst that could happen? So I went to Australia for a few months and Hong Kong, did a bit of kind of traveling. Came back and the credit crunch had turned into a recession, and that job didn't exist. So my friends had set up a business. It was actually aimed at students and giving them information on healthy eating and stuff. And that morphed into Sorted Food, which is, I think, I lose track, but I think it's still Europe's biggest food YouTube channel, that type of thing. Wow. So I worked with them for a bit, got involved with that, and that was really interesting. Learned a whole load of stuff that was just wildly different to anything I imagined I'd ever do. I have a calling for more corporate environments, so I left them to it, and maybe I regret that now, and maybe I don't. But they're off doing their thing. And then I worked for the University of London around student engagement and the environment. So using a bit of what I'd learned at uni around the environmental sciences, and a bit about what I'd learned at Sorted Food in terms of engaging students and kind of galvanizing people to do stuff. I did that, and that was the time that the sort of environmental piece was really picking up.
Yeah.
So I actually then went and did a part-time master's in environmental management for business. So marrying those pieces. And got less and less around student engagement and more around actual management systems and the way that big organisations work. And then that I went to work for a Sumitomo Chemical kind of subsidiary in Cambridge, and actually picked up health and safety there, and the similarities between health and safety and environmental, the management of risk essentially. So it was the same. And then I worked for estates directors for all of those kind of roles, and I was like, I could do this.
Yes.
I'll just cut out the middleman, and I'll be an FM or head of estates or something. That's quite fun. Wasn't very good at that. So I had a stint as a kind of head of FM and health and safety. Dropped that and joined CBRE as a QHSE manager.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So and all of it was opportunities that came up rather than a plan. I've never been one of these people that's got an A4 notepad with the sketched out 5, 10, 15 year plan.
Yeah.
At the time it was like, this is the kind of life I want. That opportunity better facilitates it. I'll do that.
Yes.
I'd never heard of QHSE as a career. I had no idea that was a thing you could do, really. It hadn't occurred to me. And then actually it was like, well, I can manage environmental risk. Like, I get it. Oh, actually, health and safety risk is very similar, and that gives you these opportunities. And actually, there's a whole load more jobs that are HS&E or EHS. So, I'll do that.
Yes.
So it was, it wasn't planned in those early days. It was very much just going where the opportunities were.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, from oceanography to Australia, then to environmental risk, and marrying it all up at the end. That's fantastic. And so, Adam, could you talk us through, I guess, what you and your team do at the moment?
That is a great question. So I have a fantastic team. I'm really, really lucky. So again, working at an organisation like CBRE, you can kind of attract talent in. So what we do, so we do FM. So that's, for those of you people that don't know kind of fully what FM is, that's just keeping the buildings running. It's the stuff that you don't really realise has to happen.
Yeah.
So from the maintenance of the heating systems and the cooling systems and the electrical systems and the soft service side of it. So that's the cleaning and the security guard and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we do all that. So we have around 7,000 people that actually do that stuff. They're changing the light bulbs, they're maintaining the pumps for the cooling systems and all of that good stuff. gas boilers and whatever. And we also have a really extensive supply chain as well, right? So the revenue for our business is going to be approaching 2 billion.
Yes.
And so 60% of our kind of work is actually done via our supply chain. So if you can imagine, we've got 7,000 people doing work that we employ directly. We've probably got another 10,000 suppliers that come in and do work for us as well.
Wow.
All of that's happening, not in a head office, not in a single site, but all over the UK.
Yeah.
All over the globe for CBRE, but all over the UK for me. So those individuals are off doing their thing, keeping the UK, keeping the world running, right? I mean, the impact of if you drop a manufacturing plant or a data center or whatever it is just huge. Like, you know, those buildings prop up society. You don't want to be the kind of organisation that stops a hospital being able to perform operations, right?
Indeed.
So super important. So a lot of pressure, complex, fairly risky stuff. They're actually, doing working on high risk systems.
Yeah.
My team is very much around making sure that the organisation is supporting the individuals to do that work,
Yes.
looking after the individuals, giving them an environment where they are able to perform. And kind of be engaged. So it's really about looking after the good work that CBRE does, and in turn that is, propping up thousands of clients in the UK who in turn are keeping the UK running, right? So it's funny how something it seems sort of abstract, but in a way the work that my team do ensures that the hospitals can do operations, or the London Stock Exchange can, it's all that stuff, right?
Indeed.
So it's varied. What are they actually doing? Well, we have a very different business model in my bit of CBRE to some of our competitors, in that my team don't really do the QHSE.
Yes.
So we're not doing the risk assessments. We're not, doing the monitoring of our supply chain or whatever. We are there to coach and support the operational leadership to deliver that.
Yeah.
So we call it the downstream model. Basically, we like to manage risk at the point of risk. So what, in my view, what you don't want is a central function that sits in a head office in London and says, right, engineer in Newcastle, this is how you need to work and this is what you'll do. Because what do you know about that site in Newcastle with all the client pressures and the nuances? So what we do instead, and my part of CBRE, is we say, hey, you've got a complex role, there's lots going on, but we believe you're the best person to really understand that risk and to manage it. And look, we appreciate you're not a subject matter expert, so here's some tools, here's a load of stuff. If you need some support, come to us. But we'll coach and guide you through making the right decision to manage risks on your site.
Fantastic.
So that's what my function does. We're the QHSE function, but really we're more of a kind of coaching and support function to enable and to facilitate our operators doing the best job that they can.
Indeed. So let me, I guess, kind of just recap that. You got, let's say, 15 to 20,000 frontline workers. Some of them are employed by CBRE, some of them are contractors, but essentially they're on the ground, supporting, I guess, making the UK economy work, supporting the hospitals and manufacturing hubs. And you guys use a downstream model in order to, I suppose, help empower them to manage risk on the front line.
But it's not just around risk. So the whole of our business, so the GWS business in the UK, from my section of it, everything is run downstream. So our HR function, which we call the people function, our commercial function, our procurement function, all of that is much leaner than you'd expect for an organisation of our size, and does a lot less of the tactical work. So you'll find actually that the contract manager, so we have our clients get grouped under the contract, and you'll have a contract manager who's essentially a little CEO.
Yes.
Who has, the power to run that contract as he or she feels fit. And so from the people decisions, it's not about going and asking the HR department to do something, you're given the tools and the knowledge and the support to just do it yourself. So absolutely for risk, but all of the functions, and that's part of the secret sauce of my bit of CBRE anyway. But yeah, from a risk management perspective, it's an absolute dream. You couldn't ask for a better way of working, because you want to manage risk at the point of risk, not from a corporate head office.
Indeed, yeah. Well, that's excellent. I've never heard of the downstream sort of approach before. So
yeah, and again, the terminology, so it probably does exist elsewhere, but certainly that terminology, that is the core of how we operate in my bit of CBRE. So yeah, the downstream model is how we refer to it, but it's more than just the functions. It's the way that we keep our leaders close to the client. So we have almost in cell biology, the way the cells split, it's got a specific name, it eludes me, but we do that with the business. So we group our contracts in business units, and when they get to a certain size with a certain turnover in terms of millions of dollar revenue or headcount or client numbers, we split them. So that the clients are always close to the leadership in CBRE, and that fosters the culture that we want. We want the organisations, we're an outsourcing company, right? So we look after people outsourced to us, but we want the client and our teams close together, because otherwise it just it's just ineffective.
Indeed. And you mentioned before that you work with 800 clients, many of whom have multiple different sites. I mean, how do you help them with their cultures and their work cultures, so that your employees and the suppliers that you use remain safe?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And we had an external event, actually. Were you at our hackathon event?
I think I was. That's the one I moved the flight to the wedding for. Yeah.
So absolutely,
worthwhile moving it.
Guest of honour, right? So we're sort of a bit obsessed with culture at the moment, actually. And look, it's a cliche thing. Culture's eating strategy, and it can be a bit of a cliche thing, but actually our business is people. So where we have those, to your point, 7,000 direct and then more suppliers, they are our business.
Yes.
And the thing that glues all that together and the way that we actually deliver what we want is through the culture. That's the way that you're actually, getting the work done. So culture is hugely important to us, and it's probably one of our biggest challenges as well, because each organisation will have a culture, and each of their sites will have a subculture. And then we're putting in teams that have got a culture that we want to nurture and we want to grow and we want to foster. And actually, you get individuals that sort of don't know what day of the week it is, because, do I work for the client? And sometimes they'll be in a client uniform, right?
Yes.
Sometimes they're in a CBRE uniform and they're the only person there in a sea of other brands. And keeping that connection is hugely important. So culture is massively important to us. How do we help clients with their culture? Well, as an outsourcing business, I think actually we help because we let them focus on their core business, right? So if you are the world's best manufacturer of widgets, right, the last thing you need to be doing is focusing on an engineering team which keeps the toilets flushing and the air conditioning on. So we take that, they can outsource that work to us, and that means then that they can focus on their core business. The way that, for a lot of our clients, some of the riskiest stuff that they do is around the maintenance of their facilities, right? So if you're a law firm, in terms of health and safety risk, it's not particularly risky. The most risky thing is probably the construction of the new building next door or the upgrade of your site. So we do that, and by we've got very rigorous standards, so we've got all the sort of ISO standards as you'd expect, but we work to a high standard. So we can direct that in. We work as a trusted advisor to our clients, so we can give that support and guidance. So, it's around communication and giving that advice, that support to our clients, and trying to influencing their culture that way. But it's a two-way thing, right? So we want the best of our clients' cultures to rub off on our teams, and also the best of our teams to kind of rub off. And how you manage that interaction is the key to success, right? That's how you make it or break.
Indeed. And look, certainly something that I've noted with CBRE is the incredible community you guys have been able to make. I mean, certainly we felt that, through my client risk talk when we, before we even won the Innovation Award, and even if we hadn't have been the winners of the Innovation Award that day, it was just such an amazing sort of community spirit where you had your team members, suppliers, and multiple stakeholders coming into one place, not just for Innovation Awards but for hackathons and other events. It's like I've not seen it in any other business.
And I think with safety, you got to be pretty cynical to not share safety, kind of best practice and innovation, because actually you're helping people, right? So that you see that a lot. And actually, I think your last guest, Paul, was talking around health and safety events and the sharing of best practice. And actually, I think it's true. You do share all of that stuff. But actually, what's fantastic about CBRE is we can pull the clients together from all the different industries and verticals, suppliers that serve all that, and actually there's a load of sharing of best practice because it's the right thing to do. And I feel like once you sort of get to a size and scale like we've got at CBRE, it becomes a sort of almost like a moral imperative, right? And it's a privilege to work with all those organizations and that breadth. So you I feel like duty bound to do that. And I think CBRE, again, I'm sort of biased, but I feel like CBRE does a fantastic job with that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think you're coming to our supplier event, aren't you, in October? So that's that's like another level. I mean, that is a phenomenal event in terms of cross-industry, cross-vertical, just bringing together organizations. And I think you'll really enjoy that one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's kind of what you said there about that having that sort of that moral impetus to share learnings. It makes me laugh because I think back to when I was at Revolut. We wouldn't have got together with Monzo and shared right? best practices on banking. Like it wouldn't happen. Because it's so competitive. But that's the beauty, I guess, of health and safety
but I
in
feel
the industry.
So health and safety, absolutely. But I feel like actually CBRE is kind of getting to the stage where even sort of the white papers that are being put around smart FM and all the kind of trends in the FM industry, CBRE is still pretty open about showing that stuff as well, and what our suppliers are able to do. It's a good thing to do, and I'm glad that CBRE follows through with that. Yeah,
indeed. And Adam, you did mention the podcast that Paul and I did recently, and one sort of term that came up in that was the new view in terms of, I guess, the safety approach to health and safety. So I'm just wondering, whether you might be able to elaborate on sort of what industry trends you're seeing and sort of buzzwords and topics are coming up.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff going on, and the trends. I've been working in health and safety now for longer than I care to remember, but CBRE for a decade, and over that time, there's been an evolution and this sort of rise of well-being and all that sort of thing. I think at the moment, there's a couple of bits. So for me, specific aspects of well-being and organizational culture are really coming to the front. So psychological safety, for example, that term wasn't really on my radar a few years ago, and now actually any HSE event that you go to, that idea about creating spaces where teams feel able to speak up and to challenge and to make mistakes and to try things out has proliferated. And I think that's attached to the terminology you use, the new view thing. So there's been a whole load of and I'll call them movements because I don't really know what else to call them, but over the sort of last, I don't even know when I've started hearing them, but certainly 5 years and before, this idea of actually there's a new way of doing safety. So we had there's a couple of kind of key protagonists in the story, but the sort of Sydney Deckers and safety differently, safety two, all this thing coming forward. And there's a lot of great stuff in there because it shone a light actually on the way that the QHSE functions in organisations were going out and doing stuff. So if you look at the prominent noisy people in health and safety globally, but certainly in the UK at the moment, they're the individuals that are sort of attached to the movement typically, and you'll hear them talking about the principles of these things, and that seems to be where the workshops are going. And there was a time where you couldn't go to a health and safety networking event without being asked whether you were safety 2 or whether you were whatever. And it's great because it, as I said, shines a light on the way that you're working and the practices and what you're doing. I think there's two sides to every story. And I think we live in a society where you're not allowed to be moderate, right? You're not allowed to be on a fence or agree with everyone. It's a social media thing. You are or you are not. You are a follower or you're not. You're a believer or you're not. And the extreme views that proliferate, particularly through social media and the way algorithms generate echo chambers and all this stuff. So that it's a societal thing where it's extreme. But I do feel like within health and safety, we're getting to the stage where actually people are getting dogmatic about the movement you're attached to, not even the job that you're doing, right? So you are bad at your job unless you are new view, you are safety 2, you're safety differently. These are the principles that you identify with and you practice and you bring to your organisation, and you have to change organisations to accept this stuff. And it becomes dogmatic, and I think people are losing sight of what we're trying to do in the industry. And actually, I don't think, because the sphere we operate in is so complex and multifaceted, there is no one single approach. And actually, even the principles, which I think the new view thing is, these are the principles that you must abide by. Maybe they're not appropriate for everything. And as I said, actually, a lot of it is just a regurgitation of just good practice. And I think actually, if you are awesome at your job and you worked in health and safety 30 years ago, you were probably doing a lot of this new stuff that's come out. And again, being super cynical, all of these movements are being put forward by people with an agenda, right? They're trying to sell you something. So Sydney Decker sells books. Right? Everyone that's sort of espousing and kind of waxing lyrical about HOP or whatever, they tend to have consultancies and they want to do learning rooms with you and all this stuff, right? So you have to really step back and kind of cut through the noise and think about what you're trying to achieve actually. So I mean, that's a trend, right? And I guess there's pros and cons to everything, and I think there's absolutely every industry, every organisation, you should always be reviewing what you're doing and how you're doing it and seeking to do better. But let's not make it tribal, right? Let's not kind of let's make it about the outcomes, not the process. I think for me, so I feel like that's a massive trend, and then the wider societal trends absolutely carry over into the industry specific as well. AI, machine learning, all that stuff. That's again, didn't know what a chat GPT was 2 years ago. Now it's like, well, actually, what's this going to do? How's this going to impact? So actually integrating this technology and making sure that we're doing so in a way which actually benefits people.
Indeed. I think that's a really interesting point, because like at Risk Talk, one of the big questions we get a lot of the time is, all right, if workers are talking about the risks that they're facing in front of them, can AI respond and say, actually, have you considered this risk, and this risk? And I guess the kind of contentious point is, if AI is guiding workers, then will workers rely too much on AI for safety and not actually think about the risks in front of them themselves?
And absolutely. And I can see that happening. I don't see that necessarily as an issue because, in life you are guided by things, and whether you're guided by AI or you're guided by your QHSE team, I feel like there's always that risk. And certainly with our downstream model I spoke about before, we have all this kind of constant tension between wanting to empower people to do something, but then making sure they do it themselves and not just so that exists. I feel like the technology isn't there yet, right? So there are still mistakes in it, so the over reliance on it, we are still not in a place where you can take gospel what is coming out of some of these systems. It will get better, absolutely, I have no doubt about that, but currently if you're like, right, all of our risk management is going to be done by AI, I'd have an issue with that, because in some experiments we've run, you just get stuff that's factually not correct. Indeed. So yeah, it's coming and it's going to be a good thing, no doubt about it. And there's a load of applications where we're already using it. CBRE's kind of got ring-fenced AI systems. We're already using it. It's sort of making its way into the work that we do at QHSE as well, but we're just using it really to generate the kind of the data, and then we're using the competent QHSE folk to direct it and decide how it's used. So that's the way it works.
Yeah, and I think that's a good hybrid approach. I think it's a responsible approach. I know there was that story about a lawyer either last year or the year before who used ChatGPT to cite different cases, went to court and fought the case, and it turns out that ChatGPT had created all of the cases.
100%, yeah.
So he got struck off.
Yeah, and so one of the experiments that we were doing with the system was exactly that. It was looking for references around case law, but also scientific, psychology journals, and ChatGPT will happily give you case law which looks right. It's got a date and a so and so versus so and so, but it never happened. Yes, and also journal articles which completely fabricated as well. So I'm sure that will get better, but at the moment, I wouldn't trust it.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, I guess if we go back a couple of years, we had the pandemic hit, and I guess it meant that a lot of people sort of moved to remote work. And, I guess this is kind of, an out of the box question, but how did the pandemic affect the health and safety industry?
Well, really, really going back. Well, I mean, the pandemic was a tumultuous time for me. So I started my current role. I actually interviewed for it in lockdown, so in my kitchen with a shirt and jacket on, marching up and down in front of a webcam with the president of the business. I just got out of NICU with my girls who were born the day, well, a little bit before, but we came out of hospital on the day lockdown started. So my world was certainly changing. And I went from being in the office, and I was in a European role then, being in the office 5 days a week, kind of degree of presenteeism, I think it's kind of fair to say. Lots of sort of travel for the sake of the travel rather than the output. The pandemic happened, and after that had settled, this new way of working, I think actually is far more efficient. So I'm not in the office 5 days a week now, and actually far more productive, healthier and happier because of it. The office has a place, and we will always need that, and I think it's vitally important for your connections at work and all that stuff to have a workplace when you're doing a role like mine. But actually travel for the sake of travel was something that needed to go, and I think that carried over. So I think the pandemic, with the hybrid working and that sort of thing, has sort of affected the landscape for a load of people, and for the way that we manage health and safety, that homework a bit. And a large section of health and safety is around well-being, and I think people that are able, if you're lucky enough to have a job where you can have a hybrid working situation, that's typically good for your well-being. Yes, I think where people need human connection and their workplaces were taken away from them, that can be extremely bad. Indeed. So there's something we need to manage there. I think for people that rely on their kind of workspace because of their home situation isn't conducive to productive work, maybe the size of their house, the number of small people running around in it making noise and playing with loud toys, whatever it is. So there's elements that we have to manage in health and safety now we never had to consider before.
Indeed, yeah.
I dare say from an environmental point of view, the pandemic's actually been quite good at sort of really, for a lot of organisations, making sure travel is, particularly air travel, is only when necessary. The rise of Zoom and Teams and those things.
Yeah.
So from those aspects of my role, that's probably an impact that's felt as well. But it, when it was all kicking off, I think it put health and safety, or elements of the health and safety role, scenario testing, contingency planning, hygiene factors, higher up the radar of the C-suite. So I think that stuff maybe with time had dropped off, and I feel like actually it really proved the importance of solid risk management and planning and doing a good job.
Yeah.
So it was a horrendous time. I mean, it sort of distorts time, doesn't it? I lose track of when the pandemic was, but it was certainly a horrific time for a lot of people. But actually, with all that aside, I feel like there are elements of the world that are a better place because of it, and some of the way that we manage risks now, it was a steep, sharp learning curve, and if organisations have made that, and I think a lot of organisations have, then it's probably done some good as a silver lining.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's interesting. When I was at university, I worked in aviation, and so the kind of like contingency planning, and if this goes wrong, how do we react, was always a really big thing, because generally if something goes wrong in aviation, it doesn't necessarily need to be a plane that goes down. There's a lot of things going on the tarmac. There's a lot of heavy equipment and machinery going on. It's just knowing how you're going to respond to it can help save people's lives, and and also I guess prevent further injuries. And so it's definitely a benefit that many organisations went into that sort of scenario planning. And that, because of the multiple lockdowns, I guess they must have gone through it multiple times.
And I don't think, anyone got it absolutely right, but certainly from what I'm reading at the moment, the government really got their emergency planning wrong, and were focused on the wrong type of pandemic and all this sort of stuff. So it's probably given us some lessons in how not to do things. And as long as individuals and as organisations we're taking lessons from that, you can do a better job at reacting in the future.
Yes.
But yeah, I must confess, I was completely caught off guard. I just didn't see in the modern world, in a developed country with a national health service, the requirement for lockdown. I just, if someone said, can you foresee in the next few years people being ordered to stay at home and not go to work? Not really. It sort of was such an abstract concept, and actually to live through the reality, I think it gives you more depth of experience. So yeah, I mean, it was a horrendous time, tumultuous personally and professionally, but actually a lot's come from it, and I think that's probably echoed wider in the industry and things.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I guess a closing thought on that from my side, I guess before the pandemic, people would rock up to work, and you're thinking about the sort of the high risk workers, from a health and safety perspective. But all of a sudden, overnight, it was like, if you rock up to work, you can catch this virus and you can die, and then it all changed. So very, very, a hard time.
But also, the other thing that's fascinating is the how important certain roles are. I feel actually everyone was being told to stay at home unless you were a key worker, and actually, industries that you never realised were kind of propping up the economy. It's like, actually these guys and girls have to go to work. And I think it was a bit of there's a bit of a division there. You got a whole swathe of individuals, workers that actually could just stay at home and just lock themselves away with their family and spend time with their kids and have a nice time. And then actually there was a load of people that would love to have isolated and love to have not had to get on public transport, but they had to go to work. And actually, the selflessness of some of our frontline workers, I think, was just inspiring, actually.
Indeed.
So, you know, it takes all sorts to kind of have a country, and those differences I thought were kind of brought into stark relief. You know, I had one of those jobs, the lucky ones that could just work from home.
Yes, yeah.
That wasn't the case for everyone.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, we're grateful for them. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast as well, for all of the people that, you know, prop up the economy, you know, doing frontline work, doing shift work, which can also have a massive effect on well-being as well. I read a book about how people sleep, and I mean,
was that Matthew Slater?
I can't remember his surname, but yeah. But
Why We Sleep.
Why We Sleep.
Yeah,
that's right.
Fantastic, that book. I've read that.
Incredible, yeah. But that's excellent. Adam, I'm just wondering, you know, in terms of regulation, are there, you know, like pretty sort of strict guidelines across the UK and the other markets that, you know, you operate in? How does regulation kind of impact your role?
Oh, massively. I mean, to be honest with you, probably the reason that you initially had a lot of health and safety functions was because of that regulatory aspect. So I think when you're, or traditionally when you're at health and safety school, doing the qualifications, you're taught there's 3 reasons for managing health and safety. It's good business sense, it's the moral thing to do, but also it's the, you know, the legal requirement. So in the UK, we've got the Health and Safety at Work Act, which when that came out in the 70s, I think taking over from previous factories acts and things was the reason to do that. Suddenly you had a legal obligation to manage that health and safety risk, not only for your employees but other people that you could affect. So it's massive. I think it's evolved, and actually I think you're getting to the point now where even without the regulation, people would still want to manage health, safety and well-being because it's good business.
Yes.
Right? So depending on your kind of political views, but I think we're at a stage now where actually you know, free market, you still have people managing risk because it's the right thing to do. If you want to be the world's best property firm, if you want to be the world's best manufacturer of those widgets again, you can't do that if you're hurting people or your employees are sick all the time or whatever. So it's good business. I think you'd always get organisations and kind of groups that perhaps have a different risk tolerance, should we say. So having that baseline there is important to set the minimum standard. And again, we're talking about people, you know, and I feel like even in this day and age, people can be exploited. So to have a minimum standard is hugely important. In the UK, we're really lucky because our regulations are goal setting. So they don't say you will do X, you will do Y. They say, on balance, don't hurt anyone.
Yes.
So you could argue, well, that's annoying because now I have to decide what the balance is and I have to do that computation. But actually, that's a good thing because it allows you to kind of be more flexible. So the US, for example, is far more, you will have this X many meters from that and you'll do this and have this many people and whatever. As long as you can, hand on heart, as a leader or an owner of a business, justify why you've done something in a court of law, then we're in a fortunate position. We're in an interesting position, and not everyone necessarily realises this, but this whole thing about you're innocent until proven guilty doesn't exist for health and safety in the UK.
Oh, really?
So the burden of proof is reversed.
Wow.
So with health and safety, it's your duty to prove that you are doing what you need to, rather than a prosecutor's job to kind of prove that you are not.
Yes.
So it becomes a bit of an administrative headache, kind of, you know, being able to evidence that. But broadly speaking, it's actually pretty interesting. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people that wouldn't think health and safety regulations interesting, but actually I think it is. So yeah, look, it's important, but I think if you're aspiring to be the world's best, to be world class, to be however you term it, whatever those mean, I think you naturally have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Where it's really useful is where companies don't have that same drive or moral kind of capacity or whatever, right, to do the right thing, then it sets a standard. But just because regulation's there, bad people will still do bad things, right?
Yeah,
that's what crime is. So.
I mean, I remember I was reading a book. I can't remember the name of the book, but they were highlighting a case of a company which knew that the fine would be X, for example, say for an employee injury, but the employee was doing a job which was, going to lead to so much more revenue that they kind of just took the fine in as a cost of doing business. And I don't know whether like the fine just wasn't big enough, but yeah, like that's I don't have kids, but if I had a kid and they decided to go and work for a company doing that, I would kind of be a bit worried.
Well, yeah, and the punitive side of the UK is just savage, right? So an injury, and it's all kind of scripted out, right? So because of case law and the way it works and sentencing guidelines and all that stuff, you kind of know what an injury or any negative situation, a loss of control, of risk, financially is worth. And actually, injuries to employees in North America, for example, can cost you, in terms of a punitive fine, thousands of dollars, and actually exactly the same event in the same circumstances in the UK could be millions.
Yes, yeah.
So that's the difference there. Again, if that's the way that organisations are running their jobs and the mindset, then arguably the regulation is irrelevant, right? It's, as I said, bad people will do bad things, or people under enormous pressure can be warped to do those things, is probably a fair way of putting it. How much regulation kind of helps that, I'm not sure. But and being pragmatic, I think your priorities do change. So you won't ever hear me say that safety's a kind of top priority, because actually it's not. It's just part of the way that you should do things. And I feel like actually your risk tolerance flexes and changes with what you've got to do. So you need to have red lines, right? So this is not acceptable. We will not do this.
Yeah.
But actually, if you're in a situation where something's absolutely imperative, like, you have a task of work to do, a job of work where, if you don't complete it in a timely manner, then a load of patients can't have an operation. I feel like necessarily your risk tolerance changes. So you have to keep in place the red line, what's acceptable but what isn't. With all the time in the world and all the money in the world, you could have a much lower incident rate, but that's not the real world, right? And that's why I think the UK regulations are actually set out well, because they allow you to make that computation to work in a proportionate way. So, if the regulations were you cannot hurt anyone at any cost ever,
yes,
then changing a light bulb would be a nightmare. In the studio we had to change light bulbs. We're going to have scaffolding. We're going to have to isolate the power to the building and all this stuff, which just the world wouldn't work and people wouldn't do it. It's not proportionate. So you have to be able to kind of flex with that and have a kind of good understanding about the way that a risk tolerance will flex, and making sure that your boundaries are set in the right place. But I think anyone that tells you that safety is the number one priority and whatever, it's just not real, right? Because it's part, and it should be part of the way that every organisation operates. If you no one wants to see people get hurt, but actually there's other stuff going on, right? And I've got kids. I've got young kids that I'm dutifully trying to raise at the moment, and I feel like this risk thing really comes in. So with the girls, my big passion is cycling. I'm trying my utmost to not pressure the girls into riding their bikes, but they're picking it up and loving it, or they tell me they are at the moment. But there's a degree of risk in that, right? So my daughter's came off her bike the other day and sort of really hurt herself, and it was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Not, what do we do? Not let them ride their bike? There's a degree of actually we're learning to ride bikes. That's what we're going to do. So there is an inherent risk. So if it was like you've got to manage at all costs, you just wouldn't let your kids ride bikes or climb trees or whatever. And I feel like as a parent, you develop this understanding about the tolerance of risk, and different parents have different risk tolerances, right? Just look at your kind of friends and family that have got kids, and you can see this. You'll get the kind of parents like, absolutely not, don't go on that, don't go on that, don't go on that. You get the more laissez-faire parents that are like, oh, I don't even know where my kids are, but they're probably having a great time. So I feel like that settles out. And if I see my daughter doing something that I'm like, absolutely not, I'll intervene. You see stuff, you're like, probably some lessons to learn there, but I'm going to let this play out for a bit. And so you start to do that inherently, I think, as a parent, and that's the right thing to do. I'm not going to do anything where it's like the risk is of a fatal incident. But if the risk is actually that daughter's going to graze her knee, then I'll let her take that risk, right?
Indeed.
And so I feel like there's an element, it's a bit of a kind of proxy, right? But there's an element of that, and you couldn't learn to ride a bike without increasing your risk tolerance, right? And so maybe you could put knee pads on, or you could only ride on rubber. Exactly. But and you do bits and pieces of that and put controls in, but that's the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, Adam, we've covered a great deal today, from sort of what CBRE does, to your journey into safety. We've discussed industry trends and even regulation. Just wondering if there's any key takeaways you'd like to share with the audience.
Key takeaways. Well, the best advice always comes from people that aren't seeking to give advice, right? So I'm always a little bit kind of withheld around doing that. I think, for any safety professionals that are listening to this particularly, where were you in 2005?
Perth.
Okay, yeah, so in the UK, 2005, it was Arctic Monkeys fever.
Okay.
So it was all the kind of illegal file sharing and this band that weren't on a record label, but they were sort of taking the UK music scene by storm. And I think when they signed to whatever record label it was, Domino, I think, and they released I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, Alex Turner started that video by saying, don't believe the hype. And that phrase has always stuck with me, because I think what he was saying then was they were like the most hype band, but it's actually like, make your own decision. So don't just jump on the bandwagon. And I think a lot of, for safety professionals, I'd say don't believe the hype. Like, there's a lot out there, there's a lot of noise at the moment, but you need to make a decision for yourself about what's right, what's working. You need to kind of stand back and view everything. So that, and I use that a lot, that kind of hype, whether it's around going on social media and seeing the next big thing, and you shouldn't eat this and you should eat that and you shouldn't do this and you should do that. There's the hype piece, I think, needs to kind of be considered with all of that. So that's probably my key, to quote the Arctic Monkeys.
Indeed, yeah. Oh, look, great quote, great song, great band. So
they've changed a bit. I mean, I've aged myself with that. But,
well, I mean, nearly 20 years ago. So to make you feel young.
It's scary, right? I remember sitting on the bus going into Southampton. I've definitely aged myself with that. But,
Oh, well, don't worry. You've won the hair competition today, so you're all right. But look, Adam, thank you so much for coming along today.
Thank you for having me.
Look forward to hearing, more developments about you and CBRE in the near future.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you.